Hi, everybody. The purpose of this part of the lecture is to basically take you guys through the where are we going and how do we get there parts of Hinduism and the parts that we don't have as much time to explore because we're in like a distance learning thing, but I still want to talk to you about and stuff like that. For example, I don't think it would be possible to talk about Hinduism if I didn't bring up meditation on some level, right? Because originally this was incredibly central to Hinduism as a way of like honing the mind and getting us to like yana and following yana yoga and stuff along those lines. Its popularity has waned for everybody, and if anything, it's become kind of like I don't know. I feel like appropriated a little bit by the West and stuff like that. More for like not religious, but for like internal like calming purposes, if that makes sense. At least the way Hindu meditation had been practiced, which usually sometimes involved guided meditation, sometimes didn't. It's still really central to Buddhism, and so we'll talk a lot more about meditation when we do Buddhism, especially Buddhism in depth. And hopefully, if we're back at school, I'll even take you into the gym for a day, and we'll do a little bit of meditation for a day and see how it works. It's very, very intrapersonal to Hinduism, and for the most part, really Brahmins or people that are very into bhakti are the people that are going to meditate on a regular basis, kind of all the time, if that makes sense. Um, as I mentioned earlier, there were also like other ways of getting to these places, which involve various types of yoga. Okay, we talked about hatha yoga being like kind of the body, the yoga of the body, but there's like Raja yoga, which was like the yoga of how to govern and like talking about what's good for kings and stuff along those lines. Jnana yoga, which involved meditation, and the yoga of the mind. All these are thinking, how do I get my body and my mind into a place that's ready to be part of me and closer to the divine? Okay, and that's why internal diversity makes this an incredibly interpersonal religion. Okay, because of these ideas and because of these ideas of devotion, right, you'd get the form of asceticism. Okay, and we talked about asceticisms being people that live on the margins, people that spend a lot of their time devoted to like religion, usually just one god. Okay, these are examples of ascetics right here. Okay, these are people that have decided that they are going to put religion over everything. They're going to wear just enough clothes to cover and keep them like alive. They're going to live in places that are just enough in order to like keep the wind and rain out. But for the most part, the reason they're going to give up all this, shun the worldly possessions and stuff along those lines, is so that they can be closer to God, so that they can figure out how to break out of their karmic dirt, and so that they can follow the religion closer in their mind. Like it really takes karma to a very kind of extreme thing. And this is where I also said this involves focus of the mind. For example, like asceticism will very much often involve like, saying like, okay, well, either the God will protect me or my mind will protect me so I can do extreme things to my body, etc., as a result of that. So one thing I do want to take just a couple minutes to talk about, and you actually really don't need to write anything down on this for the most part. This is just called "This is interesting." This is somewhat fun, and I didn't want to kill all that on essential learning. And I also like to bring up other religions when we come up. Is what happens when you take bhakti yoga to like, or either that or asceticism, or bhakti marga, whatever you want to call it. All those versions to like kind of an extreme, and that gets you to something called Jainism, and this is the first kind of spin-off of Hinduism. And there are actually a number of religions that grow out of Hinduism, not just Buddhism, though that's the most famous, if you want to aware of that. And the reason I say it's a spin-off is because it builds on a lot of Vedic traditions, beliefs of samsara, moksha, etc., etc. But basically it also says that, like, we need to do everything we possibly can to never do any harm in any way whatsoever, to cleanse, like, all karmic dirt possibly. Okay, quick side note, if you've ever seen the show The Good Place, there's a lot of, like, element of The Good Place and how to get to the good place in Jainism, or Jainism has a lot of that element in there. Like, oh my god, like, you know, in the show, one of the guys doesn't want to do anything because he's afraid that if he buys something, then he'll be supporting like child labor here and this problem here and this problem here and this problem here, and like the same thing is true in Jainism. Is like Jains don't want to like ever kill a living thing. So it like Jain, the founder of Jainism, Mahavira, actually like died when he like starved himself to death because he refused to eat anything, and before that he'd refused to wear clothes because he didn't want to kill any cotton or anything that was needed for that or stuff along those lines. Okay. Jainism goes to an extreme to promulgate the idea of ahimsa, which is peace, okay? That it would be better to die yourself than kill everything else, and that what you really need to do is be able to, like, break out of that, like, karmic example, when you are like a human, like when you are like able to like, when you're set and ready in that place. And they want to basically like, break out of the vicious cycle by getting rid of all karmic dirt. So one thing, so just to give you an idea, this is a picture of Jains in the sacred city of Varanasi. Now these would be Jains that like have decided to devote their life to Jainism, not Jains who like are just practitioners who decide that they want peace. They're probably vegetarians and they might live like possibly a more simple life, but also still be fully integrated society. And by the way, if Jainism is something that you're like, "Ooh, hold on, this is really interesting to me." Dude, think about this for your IA. This would be a fantastic IA topic. I had a kid years ago that was like, I want to know how this works. I'm just going to call a couple Jain temples and see what they say. But you can see these Jains, for example, will have feather dusters in front of them so they don't actually step on or kill anything. They won't wear shoes or anything along those lines for the most part if they can avoid it. Something in front of their mouth to make sure that they don't actually swallow or eat any bugs or anything along those lines. They generally won't, eat food that hasn't fallen off the tree if it's had to be picked or something along those lines. Hardcore Jains will have problems with that as well. So this just gives you an idea of some of the like things that like internal diversity in religions, how they can be embedded, how they grow and change over time, and how they can also kind of culturally spin off in order to like actually even create like further.
Okay, so now kind of going back to Hinduism, and this is something that you're going to want to go back to writing down again. As we talked about at the very beginning, modern Hinduism states four goals of life, known as the Parasattva. This is Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. Now, remember that the first three happen, and as a result, that gets you to the fourth. Okay, you can't do Moksha while you're alive. You do all these things, and you achieve Moksha on death. So it's almost one of those like you don't know if you've achieved the four goals until you actually die type thing. And that so when the other three, Dharma, Artha, and Kama, take place, Dharma should always take precedent over the other two. Like Artha and Kama should be enjoyed and stuff, but in balance, not excess, right? Now you've talked a lot about Dharma and Moksha, so we're basically going to use this to expand a little bit on Artha and Kama. Okay. Now, the first thing I'd say about both Artha and Kama is that part of them are originally done as a way of incorporating like basic human desires into a religious belief system and making sure that like religion stayed with what people need, want, et cetera, right? And Western religions will often go out of their way to condemn on some level these two. Okay, even if it's like not as much as you might think. Protestant Christianity is probably the worst. There are like anti like wealth and pleasure things in all three of your Abrahamic religions in some way, right? Um, Now, the first one, Artha, was meant to be this idea of like wealth and righteousness, right? And this was key for like all members of Hindu society as long as they like stayed within their caste originally. And so what happened is that like once we got past the caste or the idea of the caste and more onto the idea of Dharma being doing your duty, then the idea of Artha was just conjured out that like you could have righteous wealth, et cetera, et cetera. Kama is exactly what you think, pleasure and enjoyment in both a mental and physical sense. You can use your imagination as much as you want on that one there. It is less important than Artha, but it's important to keep in mind that like these things are key stated goals in life, right? And they should be achieved in balance, not excess, and they should be done in a number of different ways and different positive things. They are not negative things to also enjoy life if you're being a good person while doing it. After talking about Artha and Kama, I always like to spiral into talking about temples a little bit because, as we said, these are all goals in Hinduism, and this is one of the more interesting temples you'll find in all of religions. This is, it's not the technical name for it, the Kama Sutra temple, though that'll get you there pretty closely. But you can see that it promotes the idea of Kama within this temple, and as a result, you can see that those are literally people in a bunch of pleasurable positions carved throughout the walls. This is, as I said, one of the more dramatic temples, but Hinduism is internally diverse, and so as a result, you'll get all sorts, as we'll see in a second here. These are other examples of temples. As I said, I want to kind of take you through some more mainstream temples now. This is an unused temple, a temple that's kind of fallen into to not disrepair, but just a lack of use anymore. You'll see it's not colored or painted or anything like that. It's more out. It's more kind of in the open. It doesn't look that dissimilar from some of your European cathedrals that might not be used in the middle of cities anymore, or some other like religious things that are further out, right? But I want you to contrast that with the next slide. which is way more actively used temples in India. Okay, and these are pictures that are pulled like from temples in cities that are still there. You'll usually find them highly decorated. You'll find them painted a bunch of different colors. The color is really important, as I said. Like that's a big thing. Like one of my favorite descriptions was India being kind of an assault on your senses, and the color is in a good way, not in a bad way. Just everything's a little brighter, stuff like that, and the color is definitely there. You usually have the part that builds higher up in a depiction of the gods, like all around, right? And you actually a very very similar thing of depictions of like temples in the United States, right? They may or may not, and that's why I have that big one down there, which is like a former converted strip mall into a temple. That happens all the time in the United States with sacred things. Um, to give you an idea, this is just a stock image I found. It's not something that I know of to be specific in any way whatsoever, but I thought it was like a good example along those lines. You guys have seen how like temples serve as like not only like places of like worship and offering, but also like rec centers and centers of the community. The pink thing next to Skyline, while not Hinduism directly, and that's why I haven't talked about it, it's actually Isakon, which is Hare Krishna, which is like an offshoot of Hinduism. While not Hinduism directly, it does like give you an idea. It's a rec center. It's also kind of a temple. It has festivals. It has other things. There's a basketball court, I'm pretty sure, in there, stuff along those lines. I think I actually went in once to talk to people and see how things were. So like, they are like kind of all over the community, if that makes sense. Um, Other great examples that whenever I bring up temples that students always want me to bring up are two of these in here. One is in Delhi, which actually is complete with animatronics. And if you go to the tells, I'm pretty sure the story of one of the epics, maybe the Mahabharata, I could be wrong, but like literally they've got, or maybe it's the story of India. They've got a whole like river thing, almost like something out of Disney World in the actual temple, if that makes sense. If you go to the PowerPoint, you click on the little animatronics thing, that link will bring you up an example of what it looks like. The other one is one in South India that's literally made of solid gold, and it's obviously famous for that reason. Having said all that, most of your Hindu ceremonies are going to look something like this. They are going to be a puja in home. This is one that I had a student a few years ago take that involved Ganesh. That like he literally was just it was Ganesh Chaturthi, which occurs in the fall, which is Ganesh's birthday. I think it's already happened. It's usually sometime in September, I think. Anyway, the point is that like it was on that day, and so like he just took pictures and stuff like that, and this kind of set up. And this is the average everyday celebration of Hinduism that like is so important to keep in mind, not necessarily the like temple part that like for most Hindus doesn't happen on a regular basis. So with that in mind, and this is what we're going to do for the rest of the period, you guys need to look at how puja works in Hinduism. You need to be able to see what it looks like. You need to be able to comment somewhat intelligently on it. You need to be able to physically look at it, stuff along those lines. You can do this in a number of ways. One of the best ways is to actually type puja into Hinduism, put it into Google Translate so that it comes up in Hindi, and then like put that in, like paste that into Google so you get the characters in there, and then you'll find like really good examples in there. You can also, a lot of temples, for example, will now like live stream things. I've given a live stream connection here that if you go to the PowerPoint, you can check out. As I said, some of these may or may not be working because it's the middle of the night in India, but there are a couple in New York that also live stream that you can check out. You're also going to do a search or two for darshan, which is the act of seeing like a holy god or a person. And all these will bring you to commentary on Hinduism and like looking at what puja looks like. And you don't need to draw like huge conclusions, but you need to just think about like why do people do what they do and believe what they believe. All this is actually on Canvas, this part for you to see right here, but on an exit slip to post to Canvas by the end of the period, okay, just as like a like three thing, you can either do a file upload or you can put it as a text box. You need to explain any three beliefs in Hinduism and how they come into practice in puja, okay, and that'll be what we'll do for the rest of the period. So there you go. If you have to do this asynchronously, this is precisely what we did in class, and you can submit that whenever you get a chance. Have a good one, y'all. I think this includes our like online lectures for Hinduism, and we'll pick it up for Judaism in the future.